Hello and welcome to the Media Copilot, a podcast that explores how AI is changing media, journalism, and content creation. I'm Pete Paschal, longtime tech journalist and founder of the Media Copilot, and I'm excited to bring you fascinating conversations with fellow journalists, media executives, and the people building the ways we'll report, produce, and consume media in the future. Today, I'm thrilled to talk to Dilip Rajan. Dilip is a co-founder of Jumpcut, and it's a company that's disrupting a very select part of media, Hollywood, and movie production more broadly. It has a product called ScriptSense, which adds AI to the hard work of script coverage, that is, reading and evaluating screenplays. Essentially, ScriptSense can read way more scripts than any human could, analyze them, and then tell you whether they're any good or what they're about. Of course, there's a little more to it than that, but you can see why any movie studio would be interested in a machine that can read screenplays at scale, especially when there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of scripts floating around Hollywood at any given time. And that's a number that will surely increase now that ChatGPT is on the scene. I chatted with Dilip about where Jumpcut came from, how writers and agents should think about the disruption AI represents, and why Jumpcut's script processor might be just the tool Hollywood needs to get out of its reboot rut that I keep reading about. I thought it was a fascinating conversation, especially when we went deep on exactly how ScriptSense works and how it's not just chat with PDF on steroids. As always, if you enjoy the conversation, I'd encourage you to share it with a friend or a colleague, and I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to the Media Copilot newsletter if you haven't already. I'd also really appreciate it if you'd leave a rating or review in whatever podcast app you're in. Those really do help the show get to more people. Lastly, you can check out everything we offer, including AI training classes for media, marketing, and PR professionals at mediacopilot.ai. Okay, enough of that. Now on with the show and my conversation with Dilip Rajan of Jumpcut. Dilip, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell me all about Jumpcut. When did this company start? How did you get involved? What is the whole impetus behind it? It's all to do with Hollywood scripts, it seems like. But did it start there? What was the impetus here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, very high level in Jumpcut, we're building a bunch of tools that are helping Hollywood transform around AI. And the way we got started is me and my former college professor reconnected. So my background is I've been building products in the media and entertainment space. Before building Jumpcut, I was at BuzzFeed, building a bunch of interesting tools and products there, and working with a bunch of talented writers and video producers and engineers and designers. And
Nice.
my professor, I took his class, and he was one of my favorite classes in college. And he has been a serial entrepreneur. He previously had a company that applied data science and AI to digital marketing. He is also loves Hollywood, took a sabbatical previously from teaching to write a couple screenplays. They haven't been made yet, but he took them out to Hollywood and Bollywood. And I have a little bit of a background there too. I'm a creative person, I'm a musician, and I had a cameo role in the movie Pitch Perfect 2, which is my sole
cool.
IMDb credit and interaction with Hollywood before this.
When are you in the movie? We'll watch out for you.
I'm part of the team from India at the very end. There's a World Cup.
Got it.
And I'm in there for like 15 seconds. You might miss it, but
Amazing. Well, I'll definitely keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Next time that's queued up.
Yeah,
All
absolutely. Right. But yeah, we were both really fascinated by how can we apply data science and AI and tech to Hollywood, a very creative industry, and tech has been applied to portions of Hollywood, particularly like production, post-production, VFX,
Right.
And as well as like distribution, the biggest change in the industry with streaming and all of that in the last few decades. But
just to lock us in time and space here, you're talking about this is pre-current AI revolution, right? This is pre-ChatGPT?
Yeah, we were chatting in 2020. And,
oh, yeah. Okay.
And when we got started then, we actually got started trying to build our own studio that was just like, vertically integrated, using a lot of interesting technology and AI. And we had a bunch of things we were building internally to try to give us an edge at various parts of the process. And we even got as far as building out a development slate, selling a few projects to some buyers and partnering with some other really amazing production companies. But I think we got to a point where we realized we're coming up against the limits of what we could do as a single company and a new company as well, where we're a new company, we haven't fully established ourselves, takes a long time. Agents wouldn't be sending us their best scripts, like we're kind of looking for what we can find. There are a lot of limitations, and especially as this kind of AI revolution, as you put it, happened, we got a lot more questions from others on what we were doing and if our tools could be of interest to other kinds of production companies, agencies, and studios. So we pivoted all of that, and as of last summer, have been more focused on not being a studio ourselves, but being a provider of tools to help all the other companies in Hollywood transform around AI.
Right, and your main tool is something called ScriptSense. Is that right?
Yes.
So tell me about that. This is a sort of a script evaluator tool or something along those lines. How do you describe it?
Yeah, well, the problem we're looking at is like everyone in Hollywood is constantly inundated by material. There's like 150,000 plus new screenplays every year, even more.
You're talking about submitted, right? Or is that even more?
Floating around. Submitted can be a lot of different things, but submitted to someone, right? Bet. And there's even, this is probably going to go up with ChatGPT, honestly. And there's just this torrential, huge amount of material constantly coming in. And if you're a talent agent or an assistant, or you're like a development executive at a production company or a studio, you're not able to read the majority of what's coming in. You're only able to read a small fraction of it. And you're usually doing that kind of based on gut and relationships and the pedigree of who sent it to you, and kind of all these things that Hollywood gets this bad rap as an old boys club, but you kind of need those kind of heuristics when you're overwhelmed by material. But there's so many examples of amazing scripts, like movies I love, like Argo and Shawshank Redemption, where these scripts went unnoticed for years or decades sometimes. What our tool does, what ScriptSense does, is for any material you feed into it, in minutes, it gives you script coverage, which is the industry term for that kind of book report that has like the log line, the one sentence description of the movie, and the breakdown of all the characters and what kind of roles there are in the film, and the detailed synopsis and how it fits into like the Hollywood classic 3-act structure with all these sub beats within it. And we generate a really detailed creative report breaking down all of that. And that's kind of the first step. We do that, but we also do that for all the projects you put in. So over time, it turns into this organized database that you can search through of all the material you've been seeing. So if you're looking for a certain kind of project, you can quickly search through our database and find it. And when you're a production company, or even like a larger studio, you're sitting on sometimes tens, hundreds of thousands of material you've looked at. And it's really helpful to sort through and find one that might be the best fit for what you need today, whether that's fulfilling a certain mandate, a certain kind of project that Netflix needs, or you're a talent agent and you have a new client and they want to play a certain kind of role, and you need to find the right project for them.
Nice. So it's funny, the log line and stuff, I feel like, does it actually come up with things like, this is like The Gods Must Be Crazy meets The Social Network or something like that? Does it just sort of do it things? Does it do like comparisons with previous stuff? Because I feel like that's how a lot of things gets pitched.
Yeah, we do comparisons. So if you feed in a movie, we have a section in the coverage that says this is similar to these 3 movies, and not just that. Here's why. It has this element of this movie, but then it has like from a topic perspective, it's similar to this movie, but from a tone and like a themes perspective, it's more similar to this movie. So yeah, we give all those kinds of comparisons. Yeah,
this fascinates me because it's like, obviously it's introducing AI to something that was, I guess, primarily human driven and in a very flawed human way. Like you mentioned, sort of the politics of Hollywood and just sort of how it works on a relationship level. But now it's adding this agent essentially that can go in, agent in every sense, if you think about it, in terms of like both the Hollywood sense and the AI sense, that can really just read through way more than any human ever could, and then be a resource for the people. And so a lot of sort of questions sort of come out from that, in that, like, one is, I'm thinking, okay, one obvious question is, if you're a writer and a creator, how do you essentially get your script into your tool? And is that more like, is that at the studio level? Because I imagine your customers are studios for the most part. And is it like, do they get sort of an empty tool that they then need to sort of feed with the scripts that they're getting? And how is that facilitated? So like, because obviously I think though your customers are studios, I think there's a lot of writers out there who would be sort of interested in like this tool and like, wait a minute, if this is being used, like how do I one get ingested? How do I optimize for it? Like all these things. So how does that happen?
Yeah, I would say where we are today is we're a tool for all these, not individual writers, but all these companies that deal with the material,
Right.
whether it's the studios, whether it's the agencies, whether it's like production companies that are servicing and making the projects for the studios. And the way the material gets in is like they're emailed projects in a very traditional way, how it kind of happens right now, where like an agent will email like a production company a project, hey, like here's our client's project. Our production company will email agents saying, hey, we're looking to like package and staff like a director or like a certain attach an actor to this project. And a lot of this stuff is just very ad hoc, happens over email, text messages, things like
Right.
that. And we make it really simple to just import that material into our system for those companies. So where they can just forward the email along or just drag and drop the file in. And we act almost like the equivalent of like a CRM that's like organizing and managing all the pipeline. If all this is kind of like pipeline filtering through, and like of all the projects that get considered in Hollywood, there's a bunch of different stages and a small percentage of them get made. Our tool acts as an organizing workflow that takes all of this information, keeps it in one place, keeps it updated, provides all the relevant kind of objective information about it, like the log line and the character breakdowns and all of those kinds of things. We are looking into something in the future that can also start touching the writers themselves if they want to submit things for consideration by the companies using this platform. But today, I would say we're mostly like a workflow tool for all these companies.
Right. But even if it is, the relationship between Jumpcut and the studios is the key relationship here. If you are a creator and you understand that is maybe not even necessarily your tool, but that AI is now starting to be used to evaluate scripts in this way, you're going to start thinking about optimizing your work for that, right? And do you think there is anything a writer could do besides just writing a great screenplay that would maybe help them? I guess that's sort of a natural question that might come up.
Yeah. So the way we're trying to do it is not necessarily to have some kind of predictive thing that's like scoring these scripts and saying that this is going to be a hit, and therefore, as a writer, you want to reverse engineer to that. We're trying to just be an extension or a co-pilot for the people at these studios and production companies and agencies, and just help them consider a much wider amount of material. Whereas previously, maybe they'd only look at like the top 5% of stuff that like was sent to them by a trusted source or come from a pedigree person. Now they can consider a much wider volume of material, but it's what they're looking for ends up being downstream of what they're looking for. If they're looking Netflix decides, hey, like we want more projects like this, like we want more procedurals and like less like high concept sci-fi films. They're looking for those kinds of things. And as a writer, maybe it'd be helpful to know the preferences of the person, but ultimately that person is using our tool to filter through and find that kind of material. If that makes sense.
A good way to think of it, I guess, is that it's widening the lens. It's not changing the lens. Basically you're still writing for the studio and what they're looking for. And that doesn't, whatever factors that factor into that don't change.
Yes.
Yeah. Nice. So tell me a little bit more about the technology itself. So now, do you train your own model? Is it model agnostic? Like, what do you use to actually evaluate or, I guess, run the ScriptSense?
Yeah. So what we use is we use a lot of the large language models that folks have probably heard of, like the OpenAI models and the Anthropic, like the Claude models, and sometimes some of the Meta models, like the Llama models. The technology we built is somewhat model agnostic, where we built this, what we like to call an agentic architecture. We're using the word agent a lot, but it comes up in AI. So an agentic architecture that basically breaks down the script. And, these models have gotten pretty good. You can sometimes stuff an entire script in them. So you could upload a script to ChatGPT or to Claude.
Sure. Yeah, context windows are huge now.
Context windows are huge. But the problem we see is for our customers, they tell us that they don't get the information they need, like the nuance they need to actually make a decision and identify what to do about a project simply by feeding it there. You might get like a really high level log line, but let's say you're an agent and you want to know, you get sent scripts all the time and it's like, hey, I represent, I don't know, like Matthew McConaughey, and I want to know if there's a good role for Matthew in the script. You really need to understand the whole arc of the character and how you might pitch it to him and what percent of the script, the scenes does that character contain, and kind of all these questions. And the way we really get at the level of creative nuance and detail and eliminating hallucinations that we need is using this structure where instead of reading through the entire script in one look, like one of these models do, we approach it like a human does, which is you read a script one paragraph, one scene at a time, and you're constantly keeping track of multiple different things. Like there's one part of your brain kind of keeping track of, hey, like who are the new characters being introduced? What am I learning about them? You have another part kind of thinking about how am I emotionally connecting with like certain things that are happening? Like what am I learning that feels like a twist versus predictable? And you're constantly and like what are the kind of genre tropes that you'd expect that are happening and like what's happening and what's not happening. You're constantly keeping track of a bunch of things in your head as you kind of read through the entire script. And I would say the simplest way to explain how our technology works is we kind of mirror that. And we've interviewed a bunch of development execs and agents, and we ourselves at one point as a company, like I mentioned in our past, are reading a bunch of these scripts. So we've really tried to build in an understanding into our system of how a person would read through material and understand it, and have our system do it the same way.
That's really interesting. I think I would describe it, and then I mean this in the most clinical way, as like reductive as opposed to holistic. You know what I mean? Which in this case sounds like it's the correct way to do it. Because you're right. If you think about how, and I haven't put scripts in these models, but when you ask it to summarize a long article, for example, it gives you sort of this, big bird's eye view, and sort of it's this and that, and gives you some broad sort of takeaways or themes or et cetera. And to your point, like the way people connect with movies is sort of more on the scene by scene, character by character, set piece by set piece kind of like level. And if you're not going at that level, you're not really getting a feel for it. And it seems like you've really taken that into account, and by doing that sort of can give much better guidance. It also sounds fairly unique. I mean, I wouldn't say nothing's unique, but it sounds like a fairly novel way to sort of use these tools that I don't think I've heard about before.
Yeah, it's something that we were doing when we were just, especially when some of these models were worse, and we were really trying to just get this to be helpful. And now I think there's a lot of like terms like multi-agent models and things like that for what we ended up building, and we've refined over time. The other item I want to mention is that we kind of see the actual, when we talk about our technology and our platform, we see the actual analyzing of the script or the book or whatever material is uploaded as just the first step. Another problem with just uploading material to like ChatGPT or something that these companies have is, okay, well, there's some security implications around like the settings individual users have to let models train around the uploaded data, and you don't want any of these systems training on like sensitive client material. And there's also like an overall like data opportunity where if you're a talent agency and like you have like thousands of scripts coming in the door every week, and you have some percentage of them people are reading and keeping track of and things like that. If you had individual people uploading them to ChatGPT, kind of getting what they need and moving on, you're missing out on actually organizing that data in one place. And again, being able to search through it or look for patterns in the future of like, like we're getting in a lot of drama scripts, but not a lot of comedy scripts. Or if I wanted to go find a certain kind of piece of material, how can I actually go through the database and find it and keep track of that project? And what our system does is after we ingest and analyze kind of like the coverage and all that information on each project, we then we put it in the CRM and make it available for them to keep track of the status of that project over time and search for it and find it. And that's actually where a lot of how we fit into the workflows of these users comes into play. And we're not just like a transactional, save me an hour here, save me an hour there, but we're making every person just like way more productive by being able to tap into all the data flowing through their company.
That's interesting, because one of the questions I had was, kind of like the zeitgeist question, if you know what I mean. And maybe like it's like you can evaluate the quality of a script and the scenes and the character and whether or not it's engaging or not. But then there's sort of the X factor of like, is this representative of the moment right now? You know, and what that's a very ineffable thing, right? And maybe that's always on the human level. And is this sort of how that takes into account? It's not so much the software does. It's just that now that it is in a sort of centralized, remembered place, that when that moment comes and the humans that are at the agency sort of know, hey, the moment is now whatever it is, it's asteroids or whatever, which it was like back in the 90s was a thing. But now it's like, hey, we actually have a whole bunch of stuff around that concept or something similar, and that can just be really quickly surfaced whenever you need it.
Yeah,
or whenever the time comes.
To are sitting on a library like a Dropbox of hundreds of thousands of scripts, and they don't have any structured data on any of them. They just have like the PDF files, right?
Right.
But if we can suddenly tap into that and make that entire library valuable again for them, where, I mean, so much of this is timing, like you said, it's hitting the zeitgeist. And you know, things like vampires, I feel like they cycle every like X number of years, right? And like if you write the vampire script at the wrong time, maybe it just never gets attention. But if you're evaluating content and you're trying to match your understanding of the zeitgeist to the supply of the content coming in, if you can tap into all the stuff versus just what you remember from the last week that you've looked at, that becomes really powerful.
Nice. So is it ultimately like the product, is it like a chat like thing like Chat GPT, or is it, obviously there's more dimensions to it, but is that generally how people are interacting with the product?
Yeah, we have a chat assistant. And I think that's helpful in some ways because a lot of people in the industry, Hollywood's fairly old school, and you know, a lot of getting work done is texting your colleague or slacking them or sending them, like you're asking your assistant to make a grid of like these kinds of things, and it mirrors that. But I think fundamentally from like a product design perspective, I think chat is kind of like a lazy interface, and sometimes you can make something a lot more useful if you actually just help search for the right thing. Like if you can visualize, here's where all your content is, here's where the biggest pockets of genres are, here's like things like that, like different kinds of UIs other than chat can actually help visualize the data in a better way and interact with it. So chat is one way, but we also have a bunch of other kind of interfaces in our platform to help people sort through the content and read through it.
So you mentioned earlier that scripts might, you know, there's 150,000, I guess that's sort of an average number, pretty huge stat of scripts just floating around. It's going to get worse, certainly, now that AI is writing or at least assisting people in writing things. How does AI written content then interact with this? Is there any AI detection built into the product? Is it fairly agnostic about it? I mean, famously, Google says they're agnostic about AI content on the web, and I don't, you know, whether that's the right direction or not. I don't know if you have a point of view on that, or if you built the product with this in mind. But certainly, that number is going to go up, and probably like considerably in the coming years. So, how does Jumpcut treat AI written content?
Yeah, we don't do anything differently right now, and frankly, like it hasn't yet gotten to the point where it's like causing a big problem, but I think it will in the future. I think the heart of what you're getting at is as the supply goes up even more and more. Right now, the problem is, hey, I'm looking for a very certain kind of script with these characteristics. Let me find it, and that finding it is really tough. And in the future, as supply goes up even more, maybe it's like, even for that very specific thing you're looking for, there's so much material. And like, how do you actually sort through? This starts to get at us not just evaluating purely subjective criteria, but starting to evaluate for some like semi-subjective criteria. Like, how is the pacing? How is the structure of this project? Like, how does this kind of fit into things that have come before versus feel unique, right? And does this feel kind of just regurgitated by an AI and it's like a copy of something else that's come before, or actually there's like a very unique point of view being expressed in the script? And that's something we've started to look at. I think we have some of our customers just want the objective facts about scripts, but others have been pushing us to also tell them things like, hey, when I look for a script being really good, I look for this kind of criteria. And I advise writers I work with on, make sure you establish 3-dimensional characters where you show an internal motivation and an external motivation, or you have to build conflict, and in the first like a couple of scenes or the first 15 pages of the script, I want to see like this kind of conflict established for the characters. We're starting to analyze for those kinds of things as well. When our users have like criteria like that they're looking for, and help match and identify and find content like that. And the reason I'm bringing this up in response to your question is I think you're kind of getting at the heart of like, regardless of how it's written, like if it's AI assisted, AI, human, whatever it is, how do you make sure it's not just kind of like slop, like AI slop, and it's actually like high quality content worth spending time reading and considering? So that's kind of how we're starting to tackle that problem.
And when you encounter something like, I guess when it gives the report, it's probably not a thumbs up, thumbs down. It's probably a little more nuanced than that, because I would imagine there are scripts that have really cool original concepts, but maybe the dialogue needs work, or sort of vice versa, and multiple other dimensions. Is that sort of how it generally works? It's kind of like, okay, it's sort of ranking scripts on various factors and giving each a score. Is that generally it?
Yeah. Well, again, today we don't. The majority of our customers just use it for all the objective criteria. So, let alone like we don't do any thumbs up, thumbs down, but we're also not saying this is bad, this is good. But if there are criteria they're looking for, we start to score on those kinds of things, like how authentic is the dialogue compared to who the characters are portrayed as, or things like that. We have like kind of a menu of 20 to 30 different things we can analyze for like that aren't completely subjective, but are kind of like in the gray area between objective and subjective. And some of our customers pick like the 5 or 6 ones that are most important to them, and we score it based on those items. But at the end of the day, I think it's up to the human to think about what they're looking for, what emotionally resonates with them, and ultimately greenlight a script. I don't think it's realistic for a script to be greenlit and produced without a human in the loop somewhere reading it, feeling like they emotionally connect with it, and deciding how to move forward with it.
What about language? What about sort of the idea of something's written in another language, it could ingest it and then, I don't know, make it more aware, or make I guess English, Hollywood's mainly English speaking, in that something that is in, I don't know, Chinese or Arabic or whatever gets sort of, it's a quicker pipeline into Hollywood, because usually what you hear about with foreign language films is like it gets made overseas first, and then if it does well, we remake it, and maybe, I don't know, in some ways you could almost bypass that with this if you could sort of identify the quality of the script earlier.
Yeah. So we have a few customers who are looking a lot at this, like they're more international focused companies, and they're looking at how can we adapt market content in one market. Maybe there was a script in this market that maybe isn't right for this market right now, but actually fits what this other market wants. And they examine a lot of material, and our tool helps them kind of filter through material in another language where they previously have to wait on translations, and it gets very expensive and things like that. And they do use our tool to kind of filter through and figure out, okay, there's a ton of these like short novellas in this market. Which of these maybe could be right for this other market? So they're starting to use our tool in that way. I do think it's interesting you point that out. I think that's something that could probably change a lot in the future, where a lot of these content marketplaces become a lot more efficient, because not only are you able to parse through all the material, but you're also able to quickly understand if like you're looking for material, you're not limited to just content in your market or your language, but you can look a little bit broader. And like you said, the magnifying glass, or I forget the metaphor you use, the glass gets a lot larger.
Yeah.
You're able to actually
this is the lens.
Yeah.
It works. It works with the magnifying glass. This might be a dumb question, but I'll ask it anyway. Does it work for TV? Like, I know it sounds dumb because scripts are scripts, but it's also like TV series obviously have different considerations in terms of a screenplay. Like, is a character interesting enough to go longer than a couple of episodes? Is it whether it's 6 episodes, 20 episodes? There's probably different genres too that are more successful in TV. Again, that's more probably on the human judgment. But how does it? Is there any sort of discernment there?
Yeah, we do some customization of our analysis based on formats. And like one thing in TV is it's a lot less about plot. It's a lot more about characters, right?
Mm.
So uh, we for TV we do a lot more of a breakdown of the character and what's interesting about them, and where their character arc could be going. Versus we're a lot more plot centric. Like we offer like our report includes like a full beat sheet. Like every Hollywood movie has like a lot of them have like a 3 act structure and some beats in each one, and there's all these popular
Hmm.
frameworks like Save the Cat and things. If you Google, you can find online. So we do a lot more of that plot analysis for films, but for TV, it's a lot less crucial.
Hmm. Makes sense. Yeah, the 3 act format, I would think. Yeah, I mean, there's just certain standards and economics and realities of Hollywood that I think are some of it's predictable and some of it's just sort of, I guess, um, easy to optimize around. Um, but I guess one thing that I'm curious about is sort of in the current moment of Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
where I do feel like there's been a lot written in the last few months about it being kind of a crisis because people aren't going to the movies and they've had a bunch of bombs and everything's going to streaming in a couple weeks. And I was having a conversation with someone, he runs a Web3 studio. Um, and we were talking about the current moment on how it just seems like Hollywood's a bit exhausted, right? That they have all these reboots and franchises that simply aren't performing anymore, and the hits aren't really hits, and there's a big risk of doing the $200 million movie. So that's a risky thing to do. So you'd go with something that is seemingly safe. But have we maybe we've over-indexed on safe things? And is it this just kind of seems like this is the kind of thing that you don't program the tool for, but the tool is for in general, right? Because you need sort of to find, as you said, sort of those diamonds in the rough, those so essentially new IP to sort of launch some kind of, I don't know, in a dream world, some sort of new Hollywood that just is just doing amazing with all completely original stuff. But maybe 1% of that,
Yeah.
we could start small and go bigger. But that just, I don't know if I have a question there, but that's just more of an observation of like, oh, with Hollywood and studios sort of desperate to sort of figure out and reboot, not a franchise, but like themselves, this seems like a useful thing to have.
That's really what we hope here. Again, like by broadening that lens and more projects can be considered, it's not just, hey, well, let's do the IP reboot again that feels safe, but let's actually take a look at all those interesting stories and screenplays coming in and what's being written out there. And hopefully that next Shawshank Redemption or Argo doesn't go unnoticed for years on end and is found a lot sooner with our tool.
So let me zoom out a little bit and ask about something that we haven't touched on, which I don't think necessarily affects you directly, but it might. So I'll ask about it, which is the issue of copyright and how these large language models sort of hoover up data and then use it in the product. So generally, this is thought of when something like ChatGPT will give you hopefully something more or less original, something that's come up with that is different from the thing it ingested or the things it ingested. And then there's sort of a big question of, well, was that okay? Is the transformative thing really transformative? And it's already it's affecting the market, et cetera. Obviously, your tool isn't creating new scripts. And since you're using other people's models, like it's not like you did that, did the hoovering up in the first place, unless you did, if you want to say anything, tell me about that. But it's an issue, right? So how do you expect to see this playing out with respect to things like Hollywood script, which have certainly been, mixed into all the things that these large language models have been trained on? And how do you what do you see sort of the economics of whether it's the models, whether it starts touching companies like yours or what have you, like even search engines like Perplexity, like
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on copyright and AI when you're building tools like yours?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, starting with just our tool, so we don't train. In fact, we've designed our entire architecture to fully avoid having to train on any new like client material or things like that. So, for anyone
I see.
uploading scripts or books or anything, we don't train on any of that data. All that data belongs to the people who are uploading it. So our models are not getting smarter based on what they're uploading. The only thing we're doing is I mentioned that agentic architecture that simulates how a person loops through and kind of like reads a screenplay. And based on feedback we hear from our users and what they tell us, and sometimes even in our platform, they tell us this report was helpful and not helpful. We use that to just improve how we read and analyze a script. But we're not training any models, and we don't use client data in any way like that. In terms of kind of the more underlying question of existential with these large language models that have been trained on this huge corpus of the internet, I think the creative applications are where that really becomes a problem, not like these productivity and summarization applications. Because, I mean, even as humans, we read and are inspired by lots of things. But if we then regurgitate something that's way too similar to the original thing we were inspired by, that's where we get in trouble, right? Like as a musician, I follow this all the time, and you have new pop songs come out, and there's a limited number of things sometimes you can do in a pop song, and sometimes a pop song ends up sounding like an old song, and if it's too similar, like there's a lawsuit and all of that happens. I think I think where this is all headed is, as these models, if they're just simulating our experience of training and learning lots of things, but they're doing so on such a powerful scale, and then in a lot of cases, just like there's ample evidence of this, like directly regurgitating outputs. These companies training the models will have to find some way of compensating the original creators of the material that was coming in for the training data. And I think you're starting to see the early signs of this with some of the big LLM companies, AI labs, paying media publications for the right to train on some of their material and data. I think you're going to see it now in the music industry with some of the biggest players there now getting lawsuits from the major labels. I think where this goes is not that these technologies are not helpful and useful and continue to exist. I think they will, but we'll have to find some kind of way of compensating the folks creating the data that these models are being trained on and that's being used to reproduce and recreate new outputs in the future. So I think that's where things are headed, and I as an individual, I kind of agree, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
And it sounds like that's inevitably also going to intersect with Hollywood and the stuff they're putting out. I mean, there's all kinds of not just scripts but clips and whatever else on the internet, and I guess this sort of becomes a thing in media because someone will report something first and then someone will re-report it. And then even if something's sort of behind a paywall, the other one isn't. And then it sort of gets confusing, but at the same time, it's all from the original work, right? So you do sort of feel like there should still, even if it's like some other sort of free version of it, that there should still be sort of some relationship there or some connect the dots to the final output that this LLM is giving you, whether it's a creative work or just an answer. But I feel like that's like, I haven't heard a lot of talk about Hollywood and other studios suing OpenAI and stuff. But I mean, I feel like there's got to be something going on in the background in terms of like figuring out how that relationship works.
Yeah, and I think it's a tricky question. Like you point out, it's really tough. Like the attribution becomes really tough, right? Because it's like for the news example, if something gets originally reported somewhere, then it gets aggregated and reported on in different formats elsewhere, and it's behind paywalls in certain places and not in other places. Like it gets really messy. And like the same thing, like an LLM is basically like a word synthesizer, right? And that's a term I heard someone use once and has stuck in my head, where you're basically able to take previous things like words and just transform them, right? Like you're reading a long article. Like I use a browser called Arc, and Arc lets me like quickly like command find and not just find on the page, like ask a question about the page and summarize the answers. So sometimes I'm like reading a long article and I want to know like what were the important points or did it talk about this at all? And I'm able to just get that information out. Arc is doing that function for me, but Arc isn't compensating the original owner of the content in any way. There's a lot of questions like that I think like some of these things will probably get solutions and compensation for the original media creators. Some of them might not in the future, and it might result in a lot of business models adapting and changing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a little bit of value in aggregation, but it's kind of like it's tiny, and even when humans do it, it's tiny. And there's also, like you said, there's these processes that when humans do it seem okayer, but not entirely okay. Like it's not like aggregation has been the greatest thing that's ever happened to content. But at the same time, it certainly has a function, and maybe AI takes that over, and we create some new economics. So you've certainly seen, I'm sure, these generative video the products like Sora and Pika and what have you.
Mhm.
How do you? I know it's probably kind of unrelated, even, but as these things, it's just sort of all part of how Hollywood is sort of getting touched, or even just the creative process is getting sort of transformed with AI. How do you think that's going to play out with these crazy tools that are just like you can just type out something and you can get something back that is an actual like fully formed video?
Yeah, there's a lot to dig into there. I think in okay, so a few themes. One is I like right now where a lot of these are, the way people are playing with them is, you type in prompts, you get output, and you're like, wow, that's really impressive. Um, but to actually make like a full story in a narrative that's like more than just something very short form, it involves building those tools or building those capabilities into tools. So like I guess like
Mm-hmm.
what fascinates me more is not just like the underlying model and being able to say, hey, I can type this into Sora and I get the video, but how does that actually fit into the workflow of creating a film or creating a movie? And like Runway ML is a company that's been doing this for a long time. And
Right.
their tool was used for Everything Everywhere All at Once, a movie that had like a much lower budget, but had a lot of really cool VFX. And a lot of that was powered by their tool. I'm really curious to see like how these models will fit into tools and workflows and ultimately make it easier for anyone to tell the kind of story that they want to tell, and give them the tools to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, but I can also like sort of take a step back and see like this tool and your tool and even maybe the act of writing the script in the future sort of all being more and more AI driven, almost to the point where you can hit a button and it writes the script, it evaluates the script, it starts shooting it scene by scene. How would this even look? And again, like I know we're sort of far from here and there, but
Mhm.
I could like on a step basis could see almost something like in Jumpcut or something. It's like, okay, I want to see a clip of this scene, like just almost like how would that even look, right? So you'd almost combine like a Sora button into it
Right.
so that you could sort of quickly visualize something for evaluation and then
Yeah,
maybe even
we're starting to
regenerate
do
it.
some like storyboarding and previs kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
again, but that's kind of, yeah, it's using the creative process, not the final thing someone sees. I think like this is kind of the question everyone's thinking about in Hollywood, and I think it's a really important one. And when it comes down to it, we already have such a huge supply of content. Like we're maxed out. Like
Mm,
we've hit peak viewership in Hollywood. There's
right.
so many things competing for our attention. And like Netflix talks about this, like their biggest rivals for time spent are not just other streaming platforms, but it's like video games and like
Yeah.
it's Fortnite and
TikTok.
YouTube and TikTok and all of these things. So I think I this is getting really big picture, but I think where a lot of media stuff is headed is there are various different functions, like reasons people watch content. And I think like the mix of those is going to change and the providers for each of those is going to change. And whereas maybe before, just because content was so expensive to create and distribute, you had like a single format occupying a bunch of those, like a couple networks on TV and like a handful of feature films that you go into theaters and watch. Right now, if like I just want mindless content, I can open up TikTok and start scrolling on my phone. Or like if
Mm,
I have various kind of needs as a person, and there's various things that can fill those, and it's not only movies that can fill those. But that being said, I think there's always going to kind of be a piece carved out for really incredible human storytelling at like the highest art form, and that might not be the same size of viewership that has always been, but I think like there will always be a place for that. I don't think we're going to be all in our filter bubbles with like just personalized content for ourselves and no kind of common cultural touchstone or zeitgeist element. And an analogy I like to use for this is, again, I think about music a lot. And uh, with music, sometimes people used to just like, music is expensive to create, expensive to distribute, and music was kind of the soundtrack for all your moments. today, like if I'm working, sometimes I put on like lo-fi beats to
Nice.
work to. And I don't know who the creators of lo-fi beats are, but like I just use them kind of functionally as like my job there is just like kind of keep my mind in the right headspace to work. And in fact, I've started using, there's a company called Endel that uses AI to generate kind of like beats for like different kinds of moods and things like that. That doesn't mean that AI has replaced all my music listening. I'm still a huge fan of certain kinds of artists, and I like their story, and I like the craft that goes in the music. And if an AI replicated that exact thing, I wouldn't be as interested. I think that's kind of an analog for where I think a lot of other kind of media and entertainment is going to head, where certain things will be maybe automated and generated at scale to fulfill a certain kind of need. But you're always going to have like really human-driven, emotional storytelling, content, art to fulfill other parts of what we need. The mix just might be a bit different.
Nice. I like that. I like the optimistic vision. I feel like we should leave it there.
Great chatting, Pete.
Yeah, this has been awesome, Dilip. Got to do it again sometime.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to my conversation with Dilip Rajan. You can go deeper on Jumpcut at jumpcutmedia.com. And if you like what you heard, please just take a minute to leave a rating or review for the Media Copilot in your podcast app. It really does help the show. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter and check out mediacopilot.ai for our classes on AI for journalists, marketers, and content creators. Be seeing you in the future.